It's indeed a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. And it's also an honor to have been invited by Fórum do Futuro to participate in this very important moment. I was an exchange student in 1982 in the United States. It was a Rotary program. And then I understood the importance of going around and talking to people. So this window of opportunity that I had walking around Oslo, talking to some people, being here with you, meeting you, it's very relevant in my life. I'm going to be 60 next year, and it's still very nice for me to learn new things and to be with different people in different places. This talk here today stems from a very interesting situation. Fórum do Futuro has negotiated and obtained money from the World Bank for us to develop the seed to a very interesting organization, which would be a node in Sinop, in Mato Grosso, so that we could demonstrate the relevance of the ideas that have been developed after everything that has been said and done by Alisson Paulinelli and his team and the people who came after him. So we went out to form a task force, and we wanted to be as diverse as possible. And we had a hard time. Little did we know that we were not prepared to summon these people. And the third sector rejected us. Some of them started to talk with us, but left very soon in the process. We managed to do very relevant work, but it was difficult. And we had a chagrin because of that. We were sad. So Fernando challenged me to write about the problem of intergenerational communication. I cannot do that alone, so I started talking to my family. My son is 30 years old, almost 30 years old. Gabriela, my daughter-in-law, is also almost 30 years old. My daughter, Ana Paula, is 25, Marina is 22. And also my wife supported me throughout the whole process. We've been talking about this for a long time, so I would like to thank them for helping me. This was very important. It took a while for them to catch up with the situation. They did not want to talk to me in the beginning. They were reticent, but in the end, they gave their contribution, and I wouldn't have done the article you see in the book without them. You see that person over there? Guess who that guy is? Yours truly. I was a punk rocker in the 1980s. And after that, I was a pioneer in rap music in Brazil. I was one of the first people to do rap music and the hip hop and electronic music and all that. I still have a career as a musician, and that guy still lives inside of me. This is to show you that when you talk about young and old, it's all very relative. So the things that I'm going to say here are relative to certain situations that are not absolute, all right? But they're relevant as far as speculations are concerned, and they're important at the moment. We're dealing with meta-knowledge. We're trying to obtain knowledge about knowledge, so it's a good start. What we're trying to do is discuss the importance of bridging the gaps that exist for a sustainable future. And then we know that despite all the information that we have, all the technologies and everything, we have had a hard time showing the younger people in Brazil how difficult it has been to regain democracy, to provide food for the people, to provide infrastructure, to give them voice, to free the press, and things like that. Everything's taken for granted these days. But even though we've had difficulty dealing with the past, that doesn't mean that we cannot deal with the future. We cannot do that alone. So that's why we've been trying so hard to bring younger people into the process. When we talk about the third leap proposed by Paulinelli, we're talking about a very complex set of interaction and communication needs. When we deal with complexity, things become harder because we need to dismantle it in somehow and make it available for the people. And so we have to reconstruct it again with them so we can have effective communication. So we must address communication difficulties before we can do anything else. For us to build a sustainable future, we need to bridge the communication gap between the generations. We must learn to listen to each other and to collaborate on a more efficient basis. We think we communicate most of the time, but what we're doing generally is that we're exchanging information. So we send information and we receive information, but that doesn't mean that the proper feedback occurs and that we are building indeed common sense. What we need to do in order to communicate and have projects that work is to build common sense. I can never overstate the importance that communication has. It's much more than bilateral transmission of information. This is something that I want us to keep in mind all the time. So the opinion of the receiver about what the sender says is the key for the verification of perception, the feedback that will allow us to understand different worldviews and to be able to have people interacting in the process that we propose. We have a general belief that technology is a big problem, that the older people would not be able to deal with technology. But effectively, hardware and software have been very difficult to manipulate in the beginning. But now, with the new developments in interfaces, that is not going to be a problem anymore. We think that the design, which is now user-centered, will solve this sort of problem, and it will be easier for older people to adapt to the new operational systems and the new equipment. So this factor will not be central anymore. But there are other aspects related to technology. It can be indeed a barrier. I was talking to my youngest daughter, Marina. She studied linguistics, and she was telling me that the fact that people explore the internet and the digital world makes them create and generate, live in new territories. We're constantly seeing the birth of new territories, and life that is lived within these territories generates new cultures, and culture affects language. And language is the basis for our communication. We live in a codified world, and if we do not share language, it's very difficult for us to communicate. So this is a barrier which must be taken into consideration. So technology can connect us or can divide us, depending on how we adapt to it. So we need to understand it, but use it properly in order to bridge the gap as far as generations are concerned. New territories generate new types of dialogue. And what my other daughter told me, Ana Paula, she's a communication designer, is we have different backdrops for communication. So when we're talking about a certain subject, you have one backdrop and I have a different one. We think we're talking about the same thing, but we're not. So that must be taken into consideration. Somehow we must find ways to equalize the backdrop. So we must interact more. We must have better conversations if we want to bridge the gap between the generations. Another problem that we found was that there is a certain pragmatism in adults that makes us colonize the future. We're very much concerned about having the resources that we need in order to live. So we try to design the future, to colonize it. And this generates a certain rigid structure that is very difficult for the younger people to accept. I know that because I have been there. I used to get really mad when my parents tried to tell me exactly what I had to do, and I had no room for creativity or for being myself. So we must take that into consideration. The way that we see things is rigid, it's very institutional, it's the way that we've been brought up. I'm not too different from people who are 10 or 20 years older than I am, but my children are very different from me in this aspect. They value freedom in ways that I can't even understand. And we have to deal with that if we want to bridge the gaps in terms of intergenerational communication. What happens is that these differences make us closed off to dialogue. I'm generalizing here, okay? Younger people will tend to cancel us because of the things that we say and how rigid we are. I used to say that they look at us as if we were last year's iPhone. And it's something that it's incredible, but it's outdated, right? And we tend to look at them as projects, as something that it is yet to become. They're like drafts of people. And this is really annoying. I know that because of the way my kids react to me, and I know that because I've also been there. Our future, no matter how important it may be, it should not be shaped by the past. We must find ways of developing something that is really new with these conversations that we have to develop with the younger people. And I'm saying young and old here because I read a lot about it as far as academic texts are concerned, and I thought there were too many euphemisms. And this is so straightforward. I mean, when you're talking to someone, you're either young or you're old. It's immediate. You look at someone, the way they dress, or the way they talk, or the way they use technology, or they don't use technology. And I think that we should discuss ways of understanding, of seeing how important it is for us to talk and understand each other so we can build a future that is not necessarily the repetition of the past. We have to at least filter the things that have not worked well, because we tend to repeat. As we colonize the future with the information that we have right now, we're certainly repeating mistakes because we're using structures that have been already tested and are outdated. So we have shifts in power dynamics because after the groundswell that happened in around 2008 with social media platforms, every receptor became a transmitter. This was a huge shift in communication. A huge shift in many aspects, because this meant, on the one hand, democratizing communication, but on the other hand, we lost many of the gatekeeping processes that validated information, and science suffered with that a lot. So we have misinformation right now. That is one of the biggest problems that we have. But anyhow, this groundswell that was represented by the social media platforms that are based on databases, dynamic internet, it made a huge shift in power. So we need new arrangements, because the way things were before will not work in the future. It's not working right now. We can see that. The only way to keep certain power structures is through some sort of violence, either physical or mental, because we live in a world right now in which we have the freedom and the ability to destroy most of the artificial scarcities that there exist. And this is really significant. So the power dynamics have new rules. The ability to convince and mobilize society to transition towards something new and disruptive always has and always will require a very careful communication strategy. As we can see, there comes a paradox, but we have to deal with it. We need freedom in a way. We need to give space so that the younger people can talk and the older people can talk, and we can all express ourselves. But we also need a certain structure, because if we need to communicate, that means that we need some sort of code or a set of codes, a platform, a backdrop, and all this must be negotiated. That is not exactly easy, but it's something that we have to face. We have to understand, and we have to build together. So we need flexibility to have dialogue, but we need structure to advance, because we live in a very institutionalized world. In order to obtain money, in order to obtain resources, we need structure. So we have to find ways of breaking the stereotypes together and evolve, because having this stereotype mind generates what my daughter-in-law Gabriela said. Adults tend to see the cup half empty. And younger people come to us with ideas, and we're always looking at the problems of what they bring, about what the problems that are inherent to what they bring. We have a certain difficulty in seeing. Sometimes we're marveled with the skin veneer of the ideas, but we don't go deep enough into them when we try to criticizing whatever comes, because we tend to see the cup half empty and not half full. Young and old must move past these stereotypes if we want real dialogue. But we have to move out of cancellation, and we have to move out of looking at younger people as drafts. The older people, we're not outdated or unfinished. We're evolving together. We're part of a continuum. If we look at it, we have all been very young, and luckily, fortunately, we'll be very old for a long time and healthy. My son, Luis, said something that was very interesting when I asked him about the difficulties in communication that he had with me and with his mother. And he said, I recognize we have had difficulties, but the fact that you always had us spending time with my uncles, grandmothers and grandmother, with older people, made me understand them. And I see things differently than my sisters. I think it's easier for me to be around older people because I have spent time with them. And I look at this experience as something that has been affectionate. So I think that affection is the way that we can accept being together and talking and discussing things in a way that will propel us forward. Affection builds the strongest bridges. So I would like to conclude saying that if we are to build sustainable future projects, we need to enable, perfect, and amplify intergenerational dialogue so that the distinct phases in life are duly valued and the potential contributions can come to bear fruit. Thank you very much for your attention.